Her daughter called her a ghost on stage at her own retirement party. Virginia Mallory didn't flinch. By sunrise, she'd filed a governance lawsuit that froze Alicia's promotion cold. The girl wanted her name off the walls. Now she'd have to explain the forged contracts, missing votes, and padded budgets. Ghosts don't haunt halls, they haunt signatures. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The ballroom of the Hyatt Regency shimmered with soft amber light, jazz music curling through the air like perfume. Waiters weaved through clusters of dress shoes and clinking glasses. A banner stretched across the far wall. "Congratulations, Virginia Mallory, a legacy of leadership." But no one was looking at the banner. Ginny stood by the hors d'oeuvres table, a glass of sparkling water in hand, watching her daughter work the room like she already owned it. Alicia's heels clicked confidently as she moved from executive to executive, her voice crisp, her laugh always just loud enough. She wore the navy dress Ginny had given her last Christmas, the one she said was too stiff at the time. Funny how she dusted it off tonight. Ginny adjusted the silver pin at her collar, the old company logo. It felt small now. The microphone squealed lightly as Alicia stepped up to the podium. The crowd quieted. Todd Henley, the new CEO, gave her a knowing nod. "Let's raise a toast," Alicia began, eyes glinting to the future of Mallory Logistics, to fresh energy, bold leadership, and let's be honest, to not being haunted by the past. The room laughed, a little too hard. Someone actually whistled. Alicia grinned, holding her champagne flute high. "Here's to no more ghosts." Ginny smiled. Tightly, she clapped twice, softly, then stopped. No one else looked in her direction. A waiter leaned in with a polite smile. "Oh, ma'am, are you with catering? Just need to find the restroom." Ginny blinked. "No, But the young man was already gone. Her fingers tightened around the glass. She watched as Todd leaned in to whisper something to Alicia, who laughed again, and touched his arm like they'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times. HR Director Dolores gave her a polite, fleeting smile from across the room, then turned quickly away. Ginny stepped back into the corner of the ballroom, near the digital photo booth where employees were snapping goofy pics with novelty glasses and feather bows. The backdrop had the company logo printed in gold, just slightly crooked. She stared at it blankly. One photo printed out on the table. Alicia was mid-laugh in it, arm slung around Todd's shoulder. Her other hand held a cutout that read, "Next Gen Leader." Ginny looked at the printer, then at the people. No one had asked her to pose. No one had even mentioned her speech, because she didn't give one, because they didn't ask. Her phone buzzed. Frankie watched it all. "Still proud of you." Ginny's throat tightened, and for a brief second she had to look up at the chandelier to keep her composure. Frankie hadn't worked at Mallory Logistics in almost a year, but she still remembered what mattered. Ginny typed slowly. "Ginny, it's easy to haunt when no one sees you." She hovered over send, then deleted it. Instead, she slipped her phone back into her clutch and walked quietly past the photo booth, toward the ballroom doors. She reached for the handle, then stopped. Her gaze flicked to the podium. Alicia was still up there, now toasting Todd for his visionary roadmap. HR got a shout-out, the tech team, even catering, but not the woman who built the place. Brick by brick, deal by deal, warehouse by warehouse. Ginny's hand dropped from the door. She turned around. Not with a dramatic flourish, not with anger, with purpose. She walked across the ballroom, not to the stage, not to the spotlight, but toward the back hallway that led to the administrative offices, where the real records lived. Behind her, Alicia's voice carried, "And that's how we're building the future of Mallory Logistics. Strong, agile, and unburdened." Ginny passed a framed photo in the hallway. Herself, 20 years younger, holding the keys to the first delivery van. She paused, looked herself in the eyes, then kept walking. Ginny sat at the long oak dining table in her condo. No candles, no flowers, no guests. Just legal pads, a leather-bound folder, and an untouched cup of Earl Grey that had gone cold an hour ago. Outside, the Denver skyline glowed under early spring dusk. She didn't glance at it. Her eyes were locked on the embossed folder in front of her. Mallory Logistics Class A Shareholder Ledger. She opened it slowly, careful not to smudge the ink with the edge of her hand. Every line item was accounted for. Every acquisition, every board amendment, every clause. Her name sat alone at the top of the first page. Virginia Mallory, 51%. Ginny didn't smile. She didn't blink. She reached for the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in months. Barry Knox picked up on the second ring. Didn't think I'd be hearing from you until probate. Evening to you too, Barry. He let out a soft, knowing chuckle. You checking to see if they've finally dissolved your stake behind your back? I'm checking to see if anyone in that room remembers who kept the lights on during the 2008 fuel crisis. Barry paused, then answered more gently. Still shows 51% to your name. They never bought you out. They just assumed you'd. Ginny shut the folder with a precise snap. I didn't fade. I stepped aside. For your health, Barry replied. For Alicia. Ginny stood and crossed to the fireplace mantel, where a photo of her and a young Alicia sat in a brass frame matching flannel shirts, big holiday grins, one of them already learning to take up space. She's been signing policy changes that require board approval, Ginny said, her voice even. Vendor restructures, executive bonuses, reorg protocols with no second motion. She doesn't have the board, Barry said, mildly surprised. She doesn't have the votes, Ginny corrected. But she has Todd, and she has HR. That's made her reckless. Barry exhaled. Do you have proof? I have more than proof. I have a timeline. She walked back to the table and opened a smaller leather binder labeled receipts. Inside, time-stamped PDFs, internal memos, and minutes from meetings that technically never happened. I printed every version of the quarterly reports before they edited them for public release. I even kept the flagged drafts. Remember the Q1 Ops expansion plan? Barry whistled. That required 2/3 board consent. She filed it under vision alignment, Ginny said. Not even a vote. Silence hummed on the line for a beat too long. Virginia, Barry said slowly, you want to bury her or warn her? Ginny stared at the cold teacup, then at the brass photo frame. I want to haunt her, she said, her voice soft but sharp. Let's start there. Barry didn't argue. He shifted into legal mode. Then we go methodically. We open with documentation. We request review, and if they block us, they'll block us, Ginny said. We file the notice of material misrepresentation and let the board panic. She nodded to herself. How soon can you be ready? I'm always ready, Barry replied. Question is, are you? Ginny looked around the condo, sparse but warm, decorated with precision. She glanced again at the folder, 51% gleaming in sharp black ink. I built something that was supposed to outlive me, she said quietly. But it wasn't supposed to erase me. She didn't wait for Barry to respond. She reached for her tablet, opened her secured email, and attached 3 files. Voting irregularities, Q1 to Q4, vendor contracts, signed without consent, founder status memo, internal HR distribution, subject line, request for board review, urgent. As her finger hovered over send, she paused, then tapped it hard. The strategy department conference room had been repainted since Ginny last stood in it. Cool slate walls, minimalist art, a backlit sign that read, bold moves begin here. Ginny watched the meeting unfold on a muted company live feed, the Monday rollout Alicia had promised at the party. It was mostly for optics, internal morale, onboarding buzz, but the broadcast still looped through the company intranet, accessible to all shareholders. She sat at her condo's kitchen island, one AirPod in, jotting notes while sipping reheated tea. Alicia stood at the head of the table, flanked by glossy pamphlets and wide-eyed junior strategists. Her tone was brisk, her slides branded with the new campaign. Next phase, no anchors. Ginny paused the screen and zoomed in. There it was, slide 12 of Alicia's pitch deck. Phase-out schedule, founder legacy assets, Q2, Q4. She opened the file Barry had helped her secure last night. Every line of the company's strategic architecture still contained references to Ginny's authorizations, policy structures, signature rights, and allocation approvals, except now, those references were tagged with red strike-throughs. Ginny reached for her reading glasses and narrowed her eyes. At the bottom of slide 17, a footnote, foundational policies from legacy administration will sunset pending internal alignment. Translation, erase her name, repurpose her architecture, and rebrand it as Alicia's bold vision. Ginny didn't fume. She clicked into the finance folder of the intranet and scanned the latest vendor deals. A single contract caught her eye, East Point Freight Consolidation Agreement signed last Thursday. Her name was listed as the authorizing officer. But Ginny hadn't signed anything. She downloaded the PDF and pulled up the metadata. Digital signature, G. Mallory, timestamp April 12, Thendo 4 a.m. That same morning, Ginny had been at her physical therapist's office, icing her shoulder. She grabbed her phone and snapped a photo of the screen, then typed out a message to Barry. Unauthorized use of executive authority. See attached. Next step? Barry's reply came back in less than 2 minutes. Get everything. Paper trail. Let's stack it before we strike. Back on the live feed, Alicia was mid-speech again. We're clearing out the dated structures. Not out of disrespect, but because legacy shouldn't equal limitation. The new hires nodded, scribbled. Ginny clicked off the stream and opened a locked folder labeled Initiatives. In 2022, she'd earmarked $3.1 million from the annual bonus pool for employee development programs, skills certification, paid trainings, maternity transition grants. Now that money had been reallocated. A click deeper showed the budget's new destination, Q2 brand expansion rollout. Ginny let the silence settle around her like fog. Then her phone buzzed. Frankie, thought you might want to see this. Attached was a PDF titled Speech Draft Q2 Leadership Notes Final. Alicia's. Ginny opened it. By paragraph 3 she was frowning. We've finally shaken off the founder's shadow and stepped fully into the light. We stand now as an evolved entity, young, forward-looking, unburdened by the past. Ginny exhaled through her nose, slow and controlled. She highlighted the line and forwarded it to Barry with no added comment. She stood, stretched her back, and crossed to the window overlooking Cherry Creek. The air outside was warming. The snow had melted off the rooftops. Spring was trying. They thought they were burning her bridges. They forgot she built the roads. The email was simple. No frills, no bold font, no passive-aggressive CCs. Subject board review request. Policy deviations from Virginia Mallory to Executive Board, Mallory Logistics. Attachments 1 unvoted executive actions, Q1 Q2, reallocation ledger, employee development, drawn digital signature misuse. Ginny sent it at 7 a.m. sharp on Wednesday morning, while her coffee steeped in silence. By 8:12, the read receipts had all come through. Every board member, Todd, Dolores, Alicia, but no one replied. By 11 a.m., Ginny's calendar remained empty. She opened her phone and checked the internal scheduling portal. Her proposed board meeting, Friday at 9:30 a.m., had been deleted. In its place was a one-liner from Todd's assistant. Meeting request declined. Schedule conflict due to legacy fatigue reorg review. Legacy fatigue. Ginny stared at the words for a long moment, then picked up her phone and scrolled to a name she hadn't texted in nearly a year. Dolores. She typed. Ginny, did you see my meeting request get scrubbed? The dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Dolores. I did. They think you're bluffing. Ginny stared at the reply, then locked her phone. She didn't reply. She didn't rant. She just walked to the hallway closet, pulled out a long camel coat, and slid into her boots. Then she picked up a worn leather folder and walked out the door. At the Mallory Logistics front desk, the security guard didn't recognize her at first. He blinked, looked at her visitor badge, and gave a stiff smile. Welcome back, Ms. Mallory. You have a meeting? No, Ginny said, setting her purse gently on the scanner tray. But I will. The receptionist, a girl no older than 23, glanced up and whispered something into her headset. Ginny waited as her visitor badge printed. She didn't ask for coffee. She didn't explain herself. She just sat in one of the sleek leather chairs near the elevator bank, folder on her lap, legs crossed precisely. 3 interns walked past, laughing, and didn't look her way. Alicia's new assistant, a polished young man with a clip-on ID and designer glasses, gave Ginny a quick once-over before entering the elevator. Didn't greet her. Didn't slow down. Across the lobby, Dolores stepped out of HR. She caught Ginny's eye, paused briefly, then kept walking. No wave, just a slight nod. It was enough. At 11:42 a.m., the doors swung open. Barry Knox, still wearing his overcoat, stepped inside the lobby like a man with nothing to lose. In one hand, a yellow legal pad. In the other, a reusable coffee cup with a chipped lid. He spotted Ginny and walked over without a word. You're early, she said, standing. You're calm, he said, smiling faintly. That's worse. Alicia's assistant reappeared, whispering into his earpiece, eyes flicking nervously toward them. A moment later, a tall man in a black Mallory Logistics security jacket crossed the floor. Miss Mallory, I've been asked to inform you that you don't have an appointment today, he said. Ginny turned to Barry, who handed her the folder like a passing of a baton. Barry straightened his spine. She doesn't need an appointment. She holds controlling interest, and we're invoking her right to a formal governance review. Sir, the guard said, trying to keep his voice neutral, I'm going to have to ask. Barry raised the legal pad. Then ask in front of a judge. The room fell quiet for a beat. A junior manager walking past stopped mid-step and stared. Ginny stepped back, nodded once to the guard, then looked past him toward the elevators. I built this company on the backs of truckers who couldn't afford winter tires, she said, her voice low and unshakable. You want to escort me out? Do it, but I'll be back. And next time, I won't be asking. Barry gently placed a card on the reception desk. Litigation notice will be filed by end of day, he said. Enjoy your Thursday. Alicia Mallory arrived to work 15 minutes late that Monday. Her excuse, a traffic jam on Spear, was rehearsed but unnecessary. No one questioned her anymore. She was the future after all. She walked into her office with a large matcha latte and a spring blazer thrown over one shoulder. What she didn't expect was the envelope sitting neatly on her desk. Plain manila. No logo, no note, just her name, typed in bold. Alicia Mallory, confidential HR and legal notice. She peeled it open with one manicured nail, brows furrowing. Inside were 3 pages stapled in the corner. The first line stopped her cold. Notice of governance review. Promotion temporarily frozen pending outcome of legal filing. Her mouth dried as she scanned the second page. Terms of authority. Shareholder rights. Attached exhibits. Exhibit A. Misuse of executive signature. Exhibit B. Reallocation of earmarked funds without board consent. Exhibit C. Potential falsification of attendance records in governance minutes. She blinked hard, looked up. Todd Henley was already standing in her doorway. We need to talk, he said, and he wasn't smiling. The boardroom smelled like tension and too much cologne. Alicia sat rigidly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The other board members, some old allies, some new hires, shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. At the head of the table, the wall-mounted monitor flickered to life. Ginny's face appeared on the screen, centered, calm, backlit by a wall of law books and morning light. Thank you for agreeing to meet, she said evenly, voice carrying clear through the speakerphone. Todd tried to open, but Ginny raised a finger. I'll keep this brief. What I'm presenting today isn't a grievance, it's a correction. The slides began, each one numbered, each one time-stamped. Slide 1. Voting logs from Q1 showing 6 board resolutions passed with falsified attendance. Slide 2. Screenshots of internal calendar invites including 3 that were canceled, then edited to appear fulfilled. Slide 3. A side-by-side of Ginny's signature metadata versus the fraudulent East Point Freight contract. Silence. Dolores shifted in her chair. 2 other members leaned forward, visibly pale. I was marked as present in that meeting, one board member murmured, but I was on vacation in Lake Tahoe. I sent an out-of-office. Ginny nodded. I know, I have the auto-reply. She flipped to the final slide. Let me be clear, I'm not suing my daughter. I'm suing the decision she orchestrated through misrepresentation. The legal filing is for procedural injunction, not personal damages, but if you force this to trial, I will pursue every remedy available. Alicia looked around the room, waiting for anyone to speak on her behalf. No one did. Todd cleared his throat. We may need time to, confer. No, Ginny said, her voice cutting clean. You've had time. I asked for a meeting. I requested review. You ignored it. On screen, Ginny folded her hands. This isn't retaliation, she said. It's accountability. If my name is going to be erased, you're going to have to do it legally and not quietly. The screen went black. The boardroom stayed silent. Alicia stared at the frozen cursor where the Zoom window had closed. She felt her skin prickling with heat, but it wasn't shame, it was fear. The elevator dinged on the 8th floor, but Ginny didn't get out. She stood alone inside the silent steel box, watching the red LED blink. She didn't need the offices today. She needed numbers, patterns, weak seams no one thought she'd notice. Back in her condo, Ginny had already printed all 5 contracts from the procurement drive, each one stamped with her signature, each executed over the last 60 days. She laid them out across her dining table like autopsy reports. The numbers didn't lie. The East Point Freight deal, already under scrutiny, was the smallest of them. The others had sharper teeth. Holbrook Logistics, Allied Supply, Junction Paveworks, Hiram and Wade Analytics. Different categories, same problem. Inflated pricing on every line item. Freight charges 18% above market. Software subscriptions bundled with services they didn't use. Maintenance fees billed 6 months in advance. And one name kept reappearing. Erica Denton. Ginny blinked at the consulting line on the Holbrook contract. Erica Denton, procurement liaison, invoice review. Erica Denton had been Alicia's roommate in grad school. Close, the kind of close that used to vacation together in Cabo. Ginny remembered the Christmas card from 3 years ago. Alicia and Erica in matching scarves, holding mugs of mulled wine and veil. She slid the papers into a clean manila folder and labeled it with a Sharpie sloppy greed. Barry was already in his office when Ginny called. She could hear the rustling of paper and the low hum of NPR in the background. Barry, I've got 5 contracts with padding, 2 with overlapping vendors, 1 that lists a former classmate of Alicia's as a third-party verifier. Friend? Roommate? That'll do. Barry set down his mug. If there's funneling, we can get forensic accounting in motion by Friday. Quietly, Ginny exhaled. No press. Not yet. Barry hesitated. This won't just be hard on her. It'll be public. Ginny looked out the window toward the mountains, their jagged silhouettes cutting against the dusk. She used my name. She padded numbers. She funneled loyalty into pockets. A pause. I'm not the villain here. By Thursday morning, Erica Denton's LinkedIn was wiped clean of her liaison designation. The Holbrook site no longer listed her, but Ginny had screenshots, and by Thursday afternoon, Alicia's assistant Ryan was no longer at his desk. The official note said he was on temporary leave to support family matters, but the real reason was circulating in hushed hallway conversations and a quietly locked Slack channel Ginny still had access to through her founding credentials. Frankie confirmed it via text. Frankie, Ryan's out. HR said they found internal comms between him and Erica, non-compliant stuff. Ginny didn't smile. She just opened her spreadsheet and added a new tab. Document name, Ryan Admin Comm Chain. Then at 6:04 p.m. her phone rang. Todd. She let it buzz 3 times before answering. Evening, Ginny said, not bothering with pleasantries. You're going after people now? His voice was clipped, trying to stay corporate but tipping into something personal. I'm going after decisions, she said, and the people who made them without authority. Todd exhaled. You're attacking your own family, Virginia. Ginny's voice didn't waver. I'm defending my company. She hung up before he could respond. The audit committee convened quietly on a Tuesday. No memo went out. No banner across the intranet. Just a calendar block marked External Financial Oversight Review, booked in a neutral third-floor conference room with no windows and too many power strips. By noon, the entire C-suite knew what it really meant. Alicia didn't show up that day until 10:43 a.m., late enough to look aloof, early enough to still feign control. She breezed into the elevator, ignoring the glances that met her in the mirrored doors. Someone from accounting asked out loud what Founder Sunset Assets even meant. No one answered. Ginny sat at her desk in silence, watching a progress bar crawl across her laptop as the secure data archive uploaded to the audit portal. She'd made it simple. Chronological folders, all pre-sorted, receipts, contracts, memos, board protocols, the original hiring charter from 1996, HR templates from 2009, even her own onboarding video, back when she wore her hair up and still said y'all when nervous. The system pinged. Upload complete. Moments later, her phone lit up with a message from Frankie. Frankie, audit team notes just leaked. Major gaps in internal oversight. They used that exact phrase. Ginny tapped once to enlarge the screenshot Frankie had attached. A PDF excerpt. Internal summary. Records lack consistency. Executive approvals bypassed. Founder authority misrepresented. Risk grade elevated. She let her tea go cold again. By Thursday, Alicia's name was no longer the automatic signatory on expense approvals. HR had initiated what they called a legacy policy recalibration. In truth, it was a quiet return to Ginny's original structure. Training manuals began circulating again. Her originals, reissued. No credits, no footnotes, but the headers were unmistakable. Ethics and Chain of Authority 2010 Internal Draft. Mallory. Ginny printed one out, held it in her hands. Alicia had replaced every visual element years ago. Sleek fonts, aspirational slogans. But when the storm hit, everyone reached for the bones she'd built. They just didn't say her name out loud. Alicia tried to stop the bleeding the only way she knew how. Optics. Friday morning, she stood in front of a faux industrial brick wall at the corporate HQ, giving a prepared statement to a handful of local business press, a podium, a navy blazer. And by the second paragraph, a well-timed tremble in her voice. "We are navigating a difficult moment," Alicia said, blinking back what was either conviction or a contact lens issue. "But I believe in this company. I believe in clean transitions, and I—" Her voice caught. She inhaled. "I loved my mother. I still do." The feed went live, then viral, but not in the way she'd hoped. One repost was captioned, "Tears after power play? Denver's logistics queen fumbles PR damage control." Another, "Mallory daughter cries, but audit says otherwise." Ginny didn't comment, but that night she sat down at her desk, opened a blank Word document and began to type. Statement from Virginia Mallory, founder and majority shareholder. "I didn't disappear. I was watching. I watched as my signature was misused, my decisions reversed, and my company turned into a slogan. Legacy isn't about letting go. It's about remembering who built the walls that keep the wind out." VM. She printed it, signed it, scanned it, sent it to one inbox only, Internal Communications Mallory HQ. She clicked send. The headline dropped at 6:38 a.m. Founder files lawsuit against daughter's takeover. Audit uncovers misconduct at Mallory Logistics. Byline, Business Insider, West Region. Ginny read it without flinching. She was already dressed. Gray blazer, charcoal blouse, hair pinned back with her usual precision. She sat at her dining table with a cup of black coffee and let the world finally say what she'd kept quiet for too long. The article was crisp, clinical, and damning. It quoted public filings, featured one anonymous board source, and listed 5 bullet-pointed allegations, all factual, all backed by her documentation. It ended with a photo of Alicia, cropped from her failed press appearance. The caption read, "Once seen as the next-gen face of Mallory Logistics, Alicia Mallory now faces mounting scrutiny." By mid-morning, the article had over 20,000 shares. The comments were sharp, divided, brutal. "Should have bought your mother out clean. Never mess with the founder." Another nepotism case imploding under daylight. She didn't even deny the fake minutes. Ginny shut the tab. She didn't need the internet to finish what she'd started. Later that day, she arrived at the local PBS affiliate in a simple navy pantsuit and sat for a pre-recorded 1-minute statement. No spin, no theatrics, just a single camera, a black background, and a chair. "I'm Virginia Mallory, founder of Mallory Logistics. I built this company over 40 years with sweat, certainty, and steel-toe boots. This isn't about family, it's about governance. My name was misused, my authority circumvented. I've filed for corrective action because a boardroom isn't a birthright, it's a responsibility. And if my name is going to be erased, I'll make sure it's done in the light." They aired it the next morning during the local business segment. No music, no commentary. It did more than Alicia's 3-minute tearful address ever could. By the end of the week, Alicia's phone had stopped ringing. The text messages were fewer. The LinkedIn endorsements vanished, one by one. A quiet exodus began. Advisors, consultants, friends, people who once posted selfies with her at tech expos started unfollowing or rebranding. The group chat she once led, Mallory Next Gen, went silent. Even Todd Henley began the slow shuffle away. He removed her name from the firm's pitch deck in a conference that weekend in Salt Lake. He stopped copying her on investor updates. He even changed the office seating chart without announcement. His new EA was placed where Alicia's old corner had been. But it wasn't subtle enough. Screenshots leaked, Slack threads circulated. Ginny didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Inside, a yellowed photo of the company's first warehouse, snapped in 1991. In front stood a group of 5 workers in Mallory uniforms. One of them, a man with a gray mustache and a crooked grin, had circled himself in blue pen. Tucked in was a handwritten note. "Miss Mallory, I worked shipping in your Brighton warehouse in the 90s. You might not remember me, but I remember you. You showed up when trucks broke down. You loaded pallets yourself when we were short. We always said you were the real backbone. Not just because you built it, because you stayed with it. Just wanted to say I saw the news, and I still believe in you. Mike L., retired Teamster Local 17. Ginny read it twice. Then she placed it gently in the box marked Archives Personal. At Mallory HQ, the board issued an internal bulletin just before close of business. Subject: Special Motion Passed. Third-party review of strategic decisions, FY 22-24. FY 24. They didn't name Alicia directly. They didn't have to. The boardroom felt colder than usual, not physically, just quieter. The HVAC hummed faintly. No one reached for coffee. The usual pleasantries, "How was your weekend?" or "Do you need a charger?" were absent. 12 people sat around the table. Not one of them looked at Alicia. The room had been booked under a neutral name, Q2 Governance Continuity Discussion. No press, no observers, no devices allowed beyond paper and pen, just a sealed wooden ballot box at the end of the table, and a stack of pale yellow cards with pre-printed checkboxes. Dolores sat at the head, not Todd. Todd who hadn't shown. Alicia smoothed the hem of her blazer. She hadn't worn makeup. She thought it might look performative. Still, her under-eyes were puffed and gray. Dolores cleared her throat. "This vote is confidential, recorded in minutes only after majority confirmation. If you wish to abstain, do so by marking the third column." The silence that followed was not tense, it was surgical, deliberate. Each board member stepped forward, one at a time, and slipped their folded card into the box. The only sound was the soft brush of paper against wood. Alicia went last. Her hand hovered for half a second longer than it should have. When Dolores opened the box and began counting, no one made eye contact. "Motion carries," she said finally, "effective immediately." Alicia didn't ask for clarification. She didn't stand. She just stared at the table's center, at a slight scuff in the oak finish that Ginny used to run her finger over during long meetings. Dolores closed the folder. "The role of VP of Strategy is vacated pending reappointment. We're opening the floor for nomination." A pause. Then Dolores looked across the room, across the silence, and locked eyes with Ginny's face, beaming in via a muted Zoom tile at the head of the table. "Virginia," she said, "do you have a recommendation?" Ginny didn't hesitate. "Yes, I nominate Frankie Delgado." Alicia's eyes snapped up. The others looked surprised but not confused, just reminded. Dolores nodded, noted. Someone asked, "Second?" 2 hands went up. The camera feed showed Ginny adjusting her glasses. "Frankie understands operational tempo. She's ethical, she's proven, and she knows where the bones are buried. She buried half of them with me." A soft ripple of laughter broke the room's tension for the first time in weeks. Dolores turned to Frankie, who had been dialed in silently from her downtown co-working space. Frankie blinked, stunned. "You're sure?" Ginny nodded once. "I know loyalty when I see it." Frankie swallowed. Then, "Okay." Dolores gave a tight smile. "Vote on interim appointment to follow." Meeting adjourned. Alicia stood before anyone else. She left her laptop behind. No folder, no final word. She walked out of the boardroom without turning back. 1 week later, a quiet memo circulated internally. Subject: transition notice. CEO resignation. Todd Henley had submitted a formal resignation to focus on external opportunities. No farewell lunch, no company-wide thank you message, just an empty corner office and a forwarded voicemail extension. Mallory, archive review and mentorship. The old boardroom hadn't changed much. Same smoked glass windows, same walnut-paneled walls. Even the dent in the corner of the founder's table remained, made when Ginny had slammed a binder down during the 2001 shipping strike. Frankie stood near the window, arms crossed tightly over her blazer. Her hair was pulled back, and her heels clicked once as she shifted weight. Ginny entered without ceremony, a leather folio tucked under her arm. Frankie turned. "I thought you'd want to meet upstairs." Ginny shook her head. "Too much glass, and too many people who think walls don't talk." She set her folio on the long conference table and took a seat at the head, not because she had to, but because she still could. Frankie hesitated, then slid into the seat beside her. For a moment neither woman spoke. They just sat in the quiet hum of fluorescent light and faint HVAC surrounded by chairs that had held men with louder voices and shorter memories. Ginny leaned back slightly. "When we started Mallory Logistics, I didn't have a boardroom, I had a garage and a roll of tape. The first invoice I ever issued was handwritten. Got coffee stains on it." Frankie grinned. "You still have it?" "In a box marked proof. I didn't hallucinate all this." Ginny tapped the table. "This room, this table, was built 5 years later. We couldn't afford it, but I needed the team to believe we were already there." Frankie looked down at the polished wood. "And now I'm sitting in it." "You're not sitting in it," Ginny corrected. "You're inheriting it. There's a difference." Outside the room, movement stirred. Through the glass, HR Director Dolores walked past with a tablet in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other. Moments later, a ping hit both Ginny and Frankie's inboxes simultaneously. Subject: transition memo. Interim appointment official. Ginny opened the document without fanfare. Standard language. Legal boilerplate. Effective immediately, Frankie Delgado would assume strategic oversight. At the bottom was a single line that hadn't been in any memo before. We thank Virginia Mallory for her continued role in legacy clarity and stewardship. Frankie exhaled. That came from Dolores? Ginny nodded. She knew where the wind was shifting. A knock at the door interrupted them. An assistant stepped in with a printed letter in a red-bordered folder. "For Ms. Mallory," she said. Ginny didn't need to open it. She already knew. "From Alicia?" Frankie asked quietly. Ginny flipped the folder open. A cease and desist, written in bold legalese. Claims of defamation. Abuse of shareholder position. Demand for retraction of internal testimony. She closed it calmly. Dismissed on arrival. Barry had already warned her. The firm representing Alicia had sent 2 other threats the day before. Both were shredded before lunch. Ginny signed the back of the transition memo, then passed it across the table to Frankie. "Sign it, it's yours now." Frankie picked up the pen but paused. "Are you sure you're done?" Ginny smiled faintly. "I'm never done. I just know when to hand off the baton instead of clinging to the mic." Frankie signed. A slow silence followed, filled not with awkwardness but weight of history and future and choices that finally looped back into themselves. Alicia noticed the envelope before she even unlocked the door. It had been slid neatly through the mail slot, resting upright on the floor just inside the frame, as if it had placed itself there to be noticed first. She stepped over the threshold slowly, set her purse on the entry bench, and bent down to pick it up. The envelope was unbranded, plain white, sealed carefully, no return address, but the name printed across the center was unmistakable: Alicia Mallory. The label was typed, the font simple and unassuming. Her fingers hesitated at the seam for a long moment before tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of company stationery. Not the new design Alicia had introduced last year with the slate gray logo and sans serif font, but the original bold navy lettering at the top, a faint watermark of the company's first delivery van ghosted across the bottom margin. It smelled faintly like old ink and cold air. Centered on the page, typed with precision, Blex was never about revenge, it was about remembering who raised you, and who never stopped showing up. VM pledge. There were no accusations, bonds with the never about revenge. It was about remembering who raised you, and who never stopped showing up. VM pledge. There were no accusations, no legal language, no passive-aggressive phrasing, just that direct, final, and impossible to misinterpret. Alicia lowered the page slowly and noticed something else tucked behind it. She pulled it out and turned it over in her hand. It was a photograph. Real film, glossy, slightly curled at the edges from age. She recognized it instantly, and her chest tightened as if the room had shifted around her. She was 10 years old in the image, standing in front of a rented U-Haul truck, with one sock bunched lower than the other, and a missing front tooth. She wore a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big, sleeves knotted at the elbows. In her hands, held out like a trophy, was Ginny's first business license, laminated and creased from years of wear. Behind her, Ginny stood with one hand on her daughter's shoulder, the other resting on the open cargo door. She looked younger, stronger, exhausted but proud. Her hair tied up in a loose bandana, grease smudged at the collar of her flannel shirt. She wasn't smiling for the camera. She was looking at Alicia. On the back of the photograph, written in Ginny's unmistakable cursive with black ballpoint pen, were 10 small words: "You didn't build this alone. Never forget it again." Alicia sat down on the edge of her sofa and stared at the photo for what felt like a full minute without blinking. Her thumb brushed lightly across the edge of the paper, careful not to smudge the ink. She could still feel the cold bite of the Denver air that day, how Ginny had lifted her up onto the truck for the picture, telling her to stand proud like it's yours too. There were no instructions in the letter, no demand for an apology, no invitation to talk, just history, plain, silent, and waiting to be acknowledged. Alicia stood slowly and walked the letter and photograph into the kitchen. She opened the drawer beneath the coffee maker, the one where expired coupons and bent takeout menus usually ended up. She placed both items carefully inside, closing the drawer with a gentle click. She didn't cry, she didn't text, she didn't call, she wouldn't. Some parts of the damage were simply too final to name out loud. Across town, Ginny sat at her dining table with her glasses on and a fresh cup of black coffee steaming gently in the low morning light. Barry had just ended the call, his tone firm but satisfied. The court accepted the withdrawal, he'd said. All points acknowledged, no settlement required, not even a mediation. We closed it clean. Ginny didn't react immediately. She picked up her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and stopped when she saw Alicia's name sitting near the top, untouched, unchanged as it had been for years. She hovered for a moment, then tapped. Delete contact. Confirm? She did. Barry had offered to notify Alicia's counsel of the formal withdrawal, but Ginny had told him not to bother. She had no interest in letting someone else carry that message. Her silence would speak louder than his filing ever could. Outside the window, Denver's skyline glowed with a hazy spring warmth, and the hum of distant traffic moved like a soft, steady current through the air. The storm had passed. The weight had shifted. For the first time in months, her hands didn't feel clenched, and her shoulders weren't pitched for a fight. She leaned back in her chair and took a slow sip of coffee. She wasn't chasing anything anymore. Not vengeance, not recognition. She had delivered the final word, and she had done it in full control. The warehouse still smelled the same. It had been repainted and retrofitted over the years, industrial skylights added, HVAC upgraded, steel shelving replaced with climate-controlled zones, but beneath the polish, the bones hadn't changed. The same concrete flooring Ginny used to sweep herself after a 16-hour shift. The same overhead chain-pull fans, now painted matte black instead of rusting metal. Even the utility sink in the breakroom corner still had the faded sticker from their first fire inspection in '92. She ran her palm along the nearest support beam as she stepped through the space, the ridged steel catching the pads of her fingers in a way that sent a memory flickering through her. A night they'd had to work by headlamps after a fuse blew, she and 2 drivers packing crates while her daughter slept on a pallet in the office. Now there was a camera crew waiting by the loading dock. 2 softboxes illuminated the east wall, where the company's original slogan, painted directly onto the cinder block decades ago, read in flaking letters, "We go the long way so you don't have to." Ginny smiled when she saw it. She didn't ask them to stand in front of the new logo. She walked straight to the wall, adjusted the collar of her charcoal blazer and said, "Let's shoot right here." The photographer, a polite young woman named Talia, gave a nod of approval. "Perfect. The lighting loves you right now." Ginny tilted her chin slightly upward. "Good. I'm not interested in looking smaller." They took 3 portraits, one smiling, one serious, one candid, as Ginny turned slightly away and looked toward the far bay doors, now locked in warm afternoon light. Later that week, the article ran online under the headline, "Steel Toe Legacy: How Virginia Mallory Reclaimed the Company She Built." Byline, Business Insider, Women Who Reclaimed Legacy Series. The piece opened with a quote from Ginny's interview. "Legacy isn't given, it's demonstrated. Not by what you say at a podium, but by what you still know how to carry." Within hours, the article had gone viral on LinkedIn, reposted by current employees, retired warehouse managers, small business owners, and a few competitors who had watched Mallory Logistics from a safe but respectful distance. Frankie sent Ginny a screenshot that night. One post had over 15,000 shares with the caption, "Built from the ground up, fought for it when it counted." Ginny didn't reply. She didn't need to. The story spoke louder than anything she could have typed. Alicia, by contrast, had vanished from the Denver business scene entirely. Her bio disappeared from conference rosters. Her name was removed from 3 advisory boards she'd once boasted about. Her LinkedIn went dark. Her last public statement remained the one with the forced tears and the faltering delivery still circulating in comment threads that had long since turned brutal. There were no redemption podcasts, no heartfelt blog posts, just quiet absence. Ginny hadn't asked for that. She'd only asked for truth. Meanwhile, something else had begun to bloom. Frankie had announced in her second week as interim VP the relaunch of the diversity mentorship program Ginny had quietly built in 2007, back when the board didn't even know what DEI meant. This time it was expanded, funded properly, with cross-department participation and a dedicated staff member. Frankie called it the Legacy Bridge Initiative. Ginny attended the kickoff as a silent guest, standing in the back of the warehouse alongside 3 former employees she hadn't seen in years. They greeted her with side hugs and shy nods. No cameras, no recognition, just knowing glances and full hearts. Frankie gave a short speech about operational trust, sustainable leadership, and the importance of teaching not just how to lead, but how to stay led. Ginny caught her eye near the end. Frankie nodded, barely, subtly. It was enough. The morning the papers were signed, the sky over Denver was a solid sheet of pale gray, neither storming nor shining, just still, like the city had paused to listen. Ginny sat at the conference table in Barry's law office downtown. It was a minimalist space, floor-to-ceiling windows on one side, a wall of neatly arranged binders on the other. On the table between them sat 3 crisp white folders and a small black notary stamp. Everything was already in order. Barry adjusted his glasses and glanced at her across the table. "You're sure?" Ginny didn't answer right away. She looked down at the first document in front of her, the Mallory Trust, Charter and Allocation Outline, and ran one finger along the embossed seal at the top. It was more than a legal formality. It was a shift, a redirection of legacy, etched into contract, bound by intent. "Yes," she said quietly, "this is the part that matters." The trust would launch with an initial fund of $5 million. It would issue annual scholarships and vocational support grants to women entering the logistics field, drivers, dispatchers, warehouse techs, and first-generation entrepreneurs who, as Ginny put it in the founding letter, needed opportunity without needing to beg for permission. Barry opened the second folder. Inside was her revised will. He tapped the third page with his pen. "You're aware of the change this creates legally?" Ginny nodded. "Alicia is no longer a beneficiary." Barry waited as if there might be a trace of hesitation. There wasn't. "And Frankie?" he asked. "She's earned it, every inch of it." They walked through the clauses together, page by page, clear, deliberate. Upon Ginny's passing, Frankie would chair the trust and assume stewardship over all Mallory family-held equity in the firm. There would be no challenge, no review. Ginny signed every page with a firm, steady hand. Barry stamped the documents and then almost ceremonially slid the final copy into a black folio and sealed it shut with a gold sticker bearing his firm's crest. "It's done," he said. Ginny didn't reply. She didn't need to. 3 days later, the first thank you note arrived. It was handwritten, folded into a pink envelope with stickers around the edge, addressed only to Ms. Mallory, founder, Denver. Inside was a message from a young woman at a local community college who had just learned she was among the inaugural recipients of the Mallory Trust's vocational grant. She was training to become a CDL-certified driver. She'd grown up in Pueblo, raised by her aunt, and said she'd never seen her name typed on anything official that wasn't a bill or a missed appointment. At the bottom, she'd written in large block letters, "I won't waste the wheel you gave me." More notes followed. Some typed, some scribbled. One enclosed with a little enamel keychain shaped like a semi-truck. Ginny read every one. At the company's annual meeting in May, Ginny stood from her reserved seat when Dolores called her name during closing remarks. The room, now restructured with a more diverse leadership bench than it had seen in 20 years, rose to their feet in quiet unison. The applause began slowly. No clapping on cue, no over-engineered gesture. It built like a wave, honest and rising, a thank you that had taken years to shape and only seconds to express. Ginny stepped up to the microphone. She didn't give a speech. She looked out at the room full of new faces, familiar shoulders and people she had mentored long before they had titles. Then she simply nodded once and spoke into the mic. "Legacy," she said, "isn't what you leave behind, it's what you set in motion." Then she stepped back, leaving the room in standing silence. Back at home, she sat on her porch that evening with a light throw around her shoulders and a copy of the trust binder beside her. A spring wind moved gently through the pine trees lining her backyard. In the distance, Denver glowed gold against the mountains, steady and earned. She opened her phone one last time, not to check the news or messages, but to open the Vault app, where the original version of her estate plan had lived for over a decade. She tapped the old file labeled Ginny Will 2014 and watched it load. Alicia's name sat in bold on page after page, line after line. Without pausing, Ginny tapped the small trash icon at the top right of the screen. Delete file? Yes. The old founder's office had never been particularly grand. It was tucked into the corner of the second floor, just above the original receiving bay, with a narrow window that used to rattle in the wind before the insulation got redone. The furniture was plain oak veneer, bought in bulk during the 1998 expansion. There were no glass walls, no exposed beams, just the quiet sturdiness of a room meant to work, not impress. Still, when Ginny stepped inside for the first time in nearly a year, she paused in the doorway like she was visiting a memory instead of a space. Frankie stood behind her, clipboard in hand. "We cleared out the old filing cabinets, added charging stations, left the pegboard though." Ginny smiled. "That pegboard held more solutions than some boardrooms I've sat in." They both looked up at it, still dotted with pushpins and labels from another era. Freight East, rush orders, HR docs, reorder tags. Most of the tags were faded, but none had been removed. The room was no longer an executive suite. As of this week, it had been officially renamed Founders Corner, Mentorship and Strategy Hub. HR had approved the title unanimously, and facilities had installed a custom placard just outside the door in brushed steel. The plaque read, "Founded, fought for, never faded. Virginia Mallory, 1983, reluctantly to give the first intern tour herself. I don't do long speeches anymore," she warned Frankie as the small group filtered in, nervous and wide-eyed in their name badges and smart casual sneakers. 5 minutes, that's all. There were 7 of them, 4 women, 3 men. One had dyed pink hair and carried a notepad with "Learn Something Every Day" written across the cover in block letters. Ginny stood near the desk she once used to calculate payroll manually, back when the software glitched if you opened more than one tab. "You all know what this place is now," she said, voice steady. "But when we started, it was 3 employees, a rented van, and my daughter coloring under the shipping table while I negotiated with vendors on a corded phone." Some of the interns smiled. A few scribbled notes, though Ginny hadn't said anything they couldn't find on Google. People think legacy is some golden path, a handoff, but it's not. It's made of late nights and frozen docs and signing your name on something you're not 100% sure will hold. It's fixing the coffee machine yourself because maintenance forgot. It's remembering your employees' kids' names. That's the real work. She looked around the room, meeting each of their eyes. "I'm not here to be an icon. I'm here to make sure you understand what was built, so you don't break it by accident." Frankie coughed lightly in the corner, checking her watch. Ginny smirked. "That's 5. Tour's yours now, Frankie." The interns filed out slowly, some turning back to look once more at the woman who, without saying it outright, had just handed them the blueprint to everything. Later that afternoon, a company-wide update rolled through internal comms. System revision notice. As part of the ongoing integrity restoration protocol, all inactive or non-compliant executive designations have been formally removed. No names were listed, but everyone knew what it meant. Alicia's email account was gone. Her name, once embedded in templates, now returned a record not found prompt. Even the last photo of her at a company event, an awards banquet in a rented rooftop venue, was quietly replaced in the digital archive. No announcement, just absence. Ginny didn't linger on it. She simply leaned back in the refurbished chair that had once supported her through the firm's first union negotiation and looked toward the window. From this angle, the mountains looked farther than they used to, but her view was clearer now. Frankie knocked once on the open door. "You staying a while?" "Just a bit." Frankie nodded. "Everyone's calling this place a founder's shrine now." Ginny chuckled. "Call it anything you want, just not gone." They shared a quiet smile, one of mutual understanding, and then Frankie left to prepare for the quarterly forecast review, her first one alone. Ginny stayed seated, the golden late-day light stretching across the desk, illuminating the small cracks in the oak veneer. They weren't flaws, they were proof. The room was full, but it wasn't loud. That was the first thing Ginny noticed when she stepped into the newly renovated west atrium of Mallory Logistics headquarters, how the energy had changed. Not frantic, not forced, just present. People stood in small clusters. Longtime staffers in updated polos and polished boots. Junior analysts in sharp blazers. A few reporters from local business journals with notepads tucked under their arms. The catering trays had been picked over, but the coffee was still hot. There were no balloons, no awkward tribute video, just a mounted banner near the front entrance that read, "Celebrating 40 years of Forward Virginia Mallory." No dates, no retirement language, just presence. Frankie found her by the refreshments table. "You ready?" she asked, not with pressure but with warmth. Ginny straightened the lapel of her slate blue blazer and offered a half smile, "As I'll ever be." Frankie led her toward the front platform. It wasn't a stage, Ginny had insisted on that, but a low-built riser with a wooden podium and a single chair placed off to the side. The only prop was a framed archival photo of the original warehouse crew, faded but now professionally matted. One of the catering interns had spotted it earlier and whispered, "That's her," as if pointing out a landmark. Dolores opened the remarks with a few sharp, honest sentences about founding pressures and second wins. Then one of the warehouse leads spoke briefly about loyalty, noting how Ginny once held up holiday bonuses from payroll just to fund tire chains during a blizzard shutdown. No sugarcoating, no hyperbole. When it was time, Frankie didn't give a speech. She didn't need to. She walked to the mic, placed one hand over it for a breath, then turned to Ginny and said simply, "It's yours now, if you want it." Ginny stepped up slowly, without notes, adjusting the height of the microphone just once. She looked out at the crowd, not a sea of faces, but individuals she knew, had coached, corrected, sometimes even clashed with. And for a moment she just let herself breathe it all in. "When I stepped down," she said, voice calm but resonant, "some folks called me the past, said I'd been replaced, phased out, made irrelevant." A soft silence met her. She looked down briefly, then back up. They were wrong. She paused. "I was never the past, I was the blueprint." There was no immediate applause, just a ripple of breath. Then someone near the back started clapping, and within seconds it caught, rolling forward like thunder through every corner of the atrium. Genuine, loud, sustained. Ginny didn't bow. She didn't wave. She nodded once, then stepped aside. Frankie met her offstage with a hug, firm, two arms not for show. "You rewrote everything," she whispered. Ginny pulled back just enough to look her in the eye. "No, I just made sure the ending matched the truth." She stayed another half hour, posed for 2 photos, answered a question from the local press about vocational grants, drank exactly 1 cup of decaf. Then she slipped out a side door, the way she always had after big meetings. No farewell cake, no announcement over the speakers, just the click of her low heels on polished concrete and the Denver sun dipping lower behind the clouds. Outside, she passed a young woman on the way in, probably one of the newer strategy interns, who slowed as if to say something but didn't. She just nodded with wide eyes, and Ginny returned it with a faint smile. She walked down the front steps alone, keys in one hand, blazer folded over her arm. The lot was quiet. As she opened the driver's side door of her old, perfectly maintained Ford, Ginny took one last look back at the building she had built, lost and reclaimed. They had called her a ghost once, and now she'd left them haunted by everything she didn't hand over.